The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The Resolution Foundation think tank urges a radical shift in policy to reverse 15 years of stagnation since the global financial crisis. Asking prices for UK homes to fall by 1% over the next year, according to Rightmove. Plus, the price of gold hits an all-time high. Good morning, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. We begin this morning with some breaking news concerning the sale of the Telegraph Group. It comes courtesy of our city editor, Mark Kleinman, who joins me now from our Westminster studio. Mark, what have you heard?
Yeah, that's right, Ian. This concerns the role of the media regulator, Ofcom, which last week was instructed by Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, to undertake an investigation into the prospective takeover of the Daily Telegraph by Redbird IMI, a state-backed Abu Dhabi investment vehicle. Now, there's an intriguing angle, which is that Melanie Dawes, who is the chief executive of Ofcom, will have to remain recused from the Watchdog's investigation into this deal by virtue of the fact that she is married to an executive at Lloyds Banking Group. Now, Lloyds is in the next couple of hours expected to receive £1.16 billion from the Barclay family. This is funded by Redbird IMI, which will basically end Lloyds Banking Group's relationship with the Telegraph, a long-standing relationship dating back many years. And as a result of the termination of that relationship, it was expected that Melanie Dawes would be able to be involved in Ofcom's investigation into this transaction. However, it's been confirmed to me this morning by Ofcom that she will remain recused from the investigation and will play no part in it. But it's another milestone day in this saga, Ian, because Lloyds, the repayment of this loan to Lloyds is a significant moment for the bank. It's a much better outcome than it ever envisaged seeing. And of course, we now await the outcome of the Ofcom and Competition and Markets Authority's investigations, which Ms Fraser has asked for by the end of January. So another important day in the process to decide the fate of the Daily Telegraph.
Thanks, Mark. Now, the UK has seen 15 years of economic decline, with productivity growing at half the rate of other advanced economies. That's the claim today from the left-of-centre think tank, the Resolution Foundation. A report published in partnership with the London School of Economics suggests UK living standards have stagnated since the global financial crisis due to what it called a toxic combination of low growth and high inequality. But speaking at the Resolution Foundation in the last hour, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said the UK had the untapped potential to become the most prosperous economy this century.
I think it's absolutely right to say, why have all of us fallen into this low growth paradigm, and what can we do to get out of it? But I don't think this is something that we are uniquely in a bad situation with respect to. I think this is affecting all Western nations, and you have to have a plan to get out of it.
Well, our economics editor, Ed Conway's me now. Ed, this was billed as a radical report. When I looked at it, basically they just want more taxes, which is what the Resolution Foundation have always called for.
I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's radical. I mean, it's a lot of what you read in there, Ian, is you know, you've probably heard most of these suggestions before. So they're talking about kind of still maintaining higher taxes. They're talking about kind of getting rid of some of the allowances. They're talking about potentially raising benefits. They're talking about trying to increase public investment. It's a lot of stuff that, you know, within the establishment here in Westminster won't come as a surprise. But there's a couple of interesting things, I suppose. First of all, the fact that, look, there's Jeremy Hunt, the fact that he's there, and not only him, but later on today we're going to see Sir Keir Starmer there as well. It's the fact that you have these two political parties which really want to be talking about economic growth. Now, growth, it's mother and apple pie, isn't it? You know, if you get more economic growth, then everything else sorts itself out. There's Sir Keir Starmer, he'll be there a little bit later on. Growth is basically what everyone wants. Everyone has a ever so slightly, subtly different recipe for it. But frankly, you know, a lot of these things have been tried in the past, but the UK has just stagnated in terms of its productivity for a very long time. And as the Chancellor was saying, it's not like it's the UK alone. Yes, actually, in certain senses, you know, when you look at the combination of productivity And inequality, the UK does look like it's a bit of an outlier, certainly at the margins in Europe. But actually, take a step back, and actually most countries in Europe are having weak growth. Most countries have had weak productivity for quite a long time. And there are many kind of honourable things one could do about it. Try and get house building up, try and improve the planning system, try and improve investment. The problem is, we've been talking about this for a long time, haven't we? We've been talking about this kind of 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago as well, and yet none of the talk has actually kind of made any difference. So what you have today is a really interesting 300-page report looking at many of the causes, some of the solutions. There's a few omissions there. I was surprised that energy costs are a massive deal, but there's very little on how you resolve that. But it's an interesting start of this conversation. Like I say, I think the next year we're going to hear a lot about this from both political parties. But like I say, everyone wants more growth. It's no one knows precisely how to get it.
All right, thanks, Ed. Now, asking prices for UK homes are likely to fall by 1% over the next year. That's the forecast today from Rightmove, the UK's leading property portal, which says the new year is likely to see the market continue its transition to more normal levels of activity following the frenetic post-pandemic period. Well, Rightmove predicts that buyers coming to market in 2024 will be in a strong position to negotiate on price. So joining me now is Rightmove's property expert, Tim Bannister. Tim, welcome to you. Before we discuss next year, what about the here and now? I mean, the market's been far more robust this year than anyone expected.
Yeah, I think it's been more resilient than many expected. If you think back to where we were, in the last 3 months of last year, following that mini budget and the ballooning out of sort of swap rates and the mortgage products being removed from the market and mortgage rates going up as well. I think, at that point, many people may have predicted a more difficult year than we've had. It has been a challenging year for sure, but I think it's been more resilient than many expected. Prices are, in our last report, they were down sort of minus 1.3% year on year. And we predicted they'd be down minus 2% overall by the time we get to December. And we'll find out what that number looks like next week. But I suppose we were a little bit more positive than many commentators. But I think the market in general has proved more resilient than many were expecting.
Now, you make the point that you think sellers are going to have to price more competitively next year. Which segments of the market in particular?
Well, I think what we've seen is that it's those larger homes where the number of transactions are down a little bit more. Overall, SSTC, so sold subject to contract in our most recent report, they were down about 10%. But for the larger homes, so the 4 or 5 bedroom type homes, they were down more like 14%. So what we've seen perhaps is that some people in that segment, maybe they are, they're discretionary sellers. They're not necessarily rushing to sell. And in actual fact, maybe rather than accept lower prices, they may be withdrawing their properties from the market or letting them stay around for a little longer. It's that lower, the smaller properties where actually the market's moving a little quicker. And where sold subject to contract compared to where they were back in 2019 levels, I should say that's where we're comparing against, is a little bit more comparable. So I think it's those larger properties, perhaps where people still feel like the market should be a little bit more like it was back in 2022 or 2021. But the fact is, it's not that same market. Things are a little bit more challenging now. We know that rates, mortgage rates are certainly higher than they have been for a while. They've been coming down. They've been coming down over the last, since July really for mortgages. They're down now. 2-year average is about 5.11%. 5.4%. 5-year average is about 5.1%. So they've been coming down. You might get some in the 4s if you look for the best buys, but certainly they're higher than people have been used to in sort of 21, 2022. So that is reflected, I think, in sort of the level of activity that we've seen.
Interesting point that, though, Tim. I mean, given what's been going on in the mortgage market, some people might be surprised that you see the pendulum swimming back in favour of buyers rather than sellers.
Yeah, I think it's improving. I suppose what we're saying is that the market is, as you say, the mortgage rates have been coming down, which is positive for those buyers, so that they're able to sort of get that funding. There's a bit more stability there. I think that's what people look for when they're looking for their next home, and they're planning out where they might want to move and whether they can afford to move. So they want that stability so they can plan. But I think we are still in a challenging environment, and I think we're still very much in the middle of a cost of living squeeze. Growth is relatively anemic across the economy at the moment. So we're certainly in a better place than perhaps many thought we were, but it's not the same as where we were back in 2021, 2022. And I think for that reason why sellers need to continue to be priced competitively, and if they want to get that sale.
Now, next year is a general election year in all probability. Has that had a bearing on how the housing market's behaved in the past?
Yeah, typically what you see when there is a general election is very close to when the general election is due to take place. We see a little bit of a pausing of activity, or people stepping back a little bit, just waiting to see what might happen. Obviously, leading up to the election, you tend to have sort of policy announcements which may or may not impact the housing market. And then what you see post the election is you tend to see a little bit of a bounce. So people coming back, activity, catching up from perhaps the step back that might have occurred in the weeks leading up to the general election. So that's typically what we see. I would have thought that you'd see something similar again this time, depending on when the election actually is due to be. So yeah, I think that will play a part. But generally speaking, it's sort of a slight sort of step back before and then a catch up after.
OK, Tim, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Some other business news stories for you now. And the hotel industry veteran Sir Rocco Forte is to sell a 49% stake in his luxury hotel business, Rocco Forte Hotels, to Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. The sale to Saudi Arabia's $700 billion public investment fund values the business, which owns 14 hotels and 20 private villas across Europe, at £1.2 billion. Sir Rocco founded the business in 1996, following the takeover of Forte, the hotels and catering empire founded by his father, Charles Forte, by Granada Group. The music streaming service Spotify is to cut just over 1 in 6 jobs in its second round of redundancies this year. The Swedish company said it would be seeking to lay off 17% of its workforce, having cut its headcount by 6% in January this year. Daniel Ek, the founder and chief executive of Spotify, told colleagues in an email that this decision had been made in order to ensure the company was right-sized for the challenges ahead. The oil field services company Petrofac said it was considering selling a number of non-core assets with the objective of materially strengthening its balance sheet. Well, that news this morning was accompanied by a warning from the company, which employs nearly 8,000 people around the world, that it expects to suffer negative cash flow this year. Shares of Petrofac, which had already lost 3/4 of their value so far this year, fell by another 11% this morning. And the outsourcing company Capita today sold its 75% stake in Ferrous Science, a business it set up 8 years ago in partnership with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, to the private equity firm Bridgepoint for £60 million. Ferrous specialises in environmental testing, research and advisory and assurance services for both the public and private sectors. Its work includes ensuring the safety, authenticity and integrity of food and animal feed, and conducting safety assessments on the impact of new veterinary medicines and plant protection products. Well, the price of gold hit a record high earlier today, rising above $2,100 per ounce for the first time amid growing expectations of US interest rate cuts in the new year. It's succumbed to a little bit of profit taking, as you can see there now, but more or less unchanged, $2,070 per ounce for now. Well, those same factors have sent the US dollar lower again this morning on the foreign exchange markets, although, as you can see, that's slightly unwound over the last half hour or so. Sterling now trading a 0.1% lower against the dollar, more or less unchanged against the euro. The single currency very, very slightly off against the dollar. On the equity markets, well, Friday night's positive finish on Wall Street, during which the S&P 500 hit its highest level since March last year, was followed by a downbeat session overnight in the Asia-Pacific region. The Nikkei in Tokyo, you can see in the top left-hand corner of the screen, fell to a 3-week low. Well, in Europe this morning, stocks are again a bit mixed right now, ahead of what is going to be a very busy week for economic data. Talking points this morning include the Swiss drug maker Roche. It's up 2.25% in Zurich. That's on news that it's buying a US obesity drug developer called Carmot Therapeutics. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 also in negative territory, off 0.2%. The oil and mining heavyweights are weighing on the index just now. Flutter Entertainment is the leading blue chip faller in percentage terms, the owner, of course, of Paddy Power and Betfair. Among the blue chip gainers this morning, well, Rolls-Royce continues to attract buyers after last week's raising of its financial targets, up another 3.75% this morning, while the packaging group DS Smith is benefiting from broker comment. That's 2% to the good. Outside the FTSE 100, 888 Holdings, the gaming group, is up some 18% now. That's after the Sunday Times reported it had rejected a takeover approach from the gaming technology firm Playtech. It's up by just over 2.25% itself. We don't seem to have the oil price for some reason. I can tell you the oil price has actually hit a week's low. I don't know why we don't have the oil price. It is trading at a week's low, as I say. It's around $77 a barrel the last time I checked. Well, joining me now is Anna Stupnitska. She's global macroeconomist at Fidelity International. Anna, welcome to you. Let's start with the gold price, because this is 2 days running it's hit a record high. Now, what's driving this? Is it all interest rate expectations around the US?
I would say this is probably the main factor, yes. We have seen a pretty extraordinary rally in markets overall in risk assets. This is mainly driven by somewhat more dovish comments from the Fed officials, and the markets are latching onto that narrative that the Fed might have to start cutting rates earlier than expected, perhaps early 2024, and hence we are seeing all these assets benefiting from the expectations of lower and an early start to the cutting cycle and lower rates.
Yeah, now you've published your 2024 outlook. I must say, you quite depressed me. I came into work in quite a good mood today, as I always do on a Monday, and you say you think there's a 60% probability of a recession.
We are more pessimistic than consensus, and in fact, when you look at markets, indeed, they are priced perfectly for a soft landing scenario across developed markets. We do think that the policy tightening that is still in the system, it will continue having an effect on growth, particularly in the US. So we have seen that transmission in Europe. We're seeing that in the UK, where growth is low, economies are stagnating, and the inflation is moving in the right direction. In the US, however, growth is still pretty strong. The economy is resilient, and we think that the Fed will have to keep rates higher for longer to get inflation back to target, and that means that the demand will have to deteriorate, and hence we're still expecting that recession to happen in the US late in 24.
From what you're saying, that's quite interesting, though. You think the Fed are going to have to keep rates higher for longer. Does that mean potentially of global central banks, the European Central Bank might have to go before the Fed?
Yes, that's the expectation we have. The ECB is still pretty hawkish in its messaging. But again, when we look at the growth inflation mix, it shows that the economy is slowing. Germany is probably already in technical recession. Overall growth across the euro area is probably zero, so the economy is stagnating. Inflation is moving back towards target. It's not a target at all, but it's moving back towards target. And the ECB, we think, will be in a position to start cutting rates earlier. So indeed, Q1 or Q2 next year, potentially followed by the BOE, and then the Fed later in the year after they see significant growth deterioration.
So how should investors play all this, Anna?
So right now, when we're looking at the markets, risk on, and as I said, we think this is too premature to expect central banks to pivot. So we are likely to see more volatility in the market as we enter 24. We are cautiously optimistic now on risk assets, but this is more tactically. But overall, we think in 24 there is an opportunity to be long equities, but more selectively across regions, across sectors. Europe, for example, could be an interesting opportunity if we are right and the ECB will start cutting rates earlier. And at the same time, we think bonds overall should also do well. But given how well they have done so far, we think we will see some repricing in the shorter term. But overall, we think bonds will also offer good returns in 24.
OK, Anna, that's time up for us, I'm afraid. Good to see you again this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come here on Business Live, well, we're going to stay with the macro credit outlook because a worrying report predicting a rise in corporate defaults next year is out today. Finding out more after the break. Don't go away.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, corporate defaults are set to rise next year as more borrowers are forced to refinance at higher rates of interest than they have enjoyed during the last 5 years. That's one of the main predictions from S&P Global Ratings in its Global Corporate Credit Conditions Report for 2024. It expects interest rates around the world to remain at current levels for at least the first half of the year, with those sectors exposed to a decline in consumer spending most vulnerable. Well, here to talk about this is Paul Waters. He's head of corporate credit research at S&P Global. Paul, welcome to you. I mean, defaults are already above historic levels in both the US and Europe, but you think there's more to come?
Yes, good morning, Ian. Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing a sort of a gradual rise in defaults. And as you say, the main reason for that is, slow growth, still relatively high inflation, and obviously refinancing. So liquidity issues are important. I mean, for us, companies are really focusing on cash flow. debt sustainability and debt service. And actually, because a lot of the refinancing is still to happen, so we're going to see 25 and 26 maturities refinanced next year. And for a lot of those companies that are not generating much free cash flow, then that's going to feed, in our view, to a gradual increase in defaults towards 3.75% by September.
So is it the case then that the market is just not going to be willing to lend to some of these corporates, but they will just require a good deal more than they were?
Well, I think it's a lot of it is because we haven't really seen balance sheets being addressed. We've had a long period of effectively excessively lax monetary policy and very cheap and available debt financing. But actually now we've moved into a different world, and so actually I think lenders are having to really look at much more carefully at the credits that they're lending to, and I think that will feed into a more discriminating lender stance, which will translate into sort of more restructurings as we go through next year.
So if I'm a corporate and I'm not quite at sort of subprime grade, but I'm at triple B or whatever. What are my options? I mean, am I going to be able to go to the bank and raise bank borrowing?
Well, actually, the banking sector has capacity to lend. We don't see this default issue as in any shape or form a problem for investment grade companies. They have the flexibility, financial flexibility to adapt to this new environment. Real estate is a separate question because obviously there are quite a few real estate companies in investment grade, so they may have still some challenges refinancing. But actually, most of the issue in terms of vulnerability from a credit perspective we see is in the single B and triple C space, and that's where we expect to see the defaults come from next year.
You mentioned real estate there. You think that's a particular concern in China?
Oh, well, in China, that's a long-running story. And clearly, yes, I mean, we're looking for property sales to actually decline again in 2024. But we think we're sort of coming towards the bottom of that cycle. But it's still going to take quite a while for if you like, the issues around financial stability in China to sort of, to fade away. You still have the problems with local government financing vehicles, but at the same time, the authorities do have some levers at their disposal to underpin the domestic economy. And of course, that's what we've seen in recent months.
And what about the banking sector around the world? I mean, clearly, it's far better capitalised than it was at any point, really, in the last 15 years. Is that a comfort factor?
Yeah, I think, absolutely. I mean, in Europe, we see the banking sector as having a stable outlook. We see profitability and capital and liquidity being very strong. The issue, the issue more for the banks is the asset quality of their balance sheet going forward. And while we do see some vulnerabilities appearing, as we discussed on real estate, commercial real estate in particular, unsecured lending as well. Nonetheless, we think that it comfortably can be covered by their earnings, actually, as we look at next year, even on quite a sort of a stressed downside case.
All right, well, that's a reasonably optimistic note on which to end, isn't it, Paul? Good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it from me for the time being. I'll be back at 4:30 with our afternoon edition. Do hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, do stay tuned. Coming up after this short break, it's Jane Secker. See you later on. Cheerio.